join in singing as we worship the Lord to begin our time together. Seek ye first. We're going to sing this a cappella. Okay, there we go. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. Alleluia, alleluia. Ask and it shall be given unto you. Seek and ye shall find. Knock and the door shall be opened unto you. Alleluia, alleluia. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. Hallelujah.
Hear these words from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 9. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus, Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. He did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud there came a voice. This is my Son, the Beloved. Listen to him. Suddenly, when they looked around, they saw no one with them anymore, but only Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus ordered them to tell no one about what they had seen until after the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So they kept the matter to themselves, questioning what this rising from the dead could mean. This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Let us be in a spirit of prayer. O gracious God, creator of all life, transformative light in our lives that guide us along our pathways of faith, your light offers us hope. Hope in an ever-changing world. Lord, we pray today that your Spirit descend upon us, opening our hearts and minds to these presentations giving. May it be a blessed time of learning and inspirational discussion, Lord, about new opportunities put forth in ways that we can witness to our communities that we serve, people looking for just a beam of hope, oh Lord, and may we be that hope for them, and may we find ways of putting some of the things that we are discussing and learning about today in practice. May your Let's sing again. First. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. Alleluia, alleluia. Ask and it shall be given unto you. Seek and ye shall find. Knock and the door shall be opened unto you. Alleluia, alleluia. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. Alleluia, alleluia. Amen. Angelic choir. So welcome to our, I think, first ever resources workshop for churches here in the Mid-Coast area. I'm getting it. So I first want to just say thank you to the host church here, to Calvary, and for Annie in opening up the doors for us, and also for John, who's running AV back there, and recording live. So if you're joining us live, welcome to you as well. And also for Nikki running the slides up there. So, and especially thank you for those of you who could be here in person in this rainy day. My name is Gwyneth Harrison, and I am the chair of the Congregational Development Team. And so I just want to do a few housekeeping things before we begin. One is those bathrooms are out. There's one bathroom right out there to the left if you go out to the fellowship hall. And then exit is probably the best exit is the one that you came into, but I think there's also an emergency exit here. And so today's event is brought to you, as we said, by the Congregational Development Team. And so we have Karen Munson with us, and Jen Reed, and myself, and John Baker-Strebe, and Annie Baker-Strebe, and my own Park. So our district team formed just last year, and so we're fairly new, and we're looking for new members. So if you know of anybody, if you're interested, or you know of anybody in your congregation, clergy or laity, we would love to have you join our team. We are actually going to be beginning to meet some online, rather than having everybody to drive up to the district office. We have some face-to-face meetings, but it's a lot more convenient that way, and with a small team of people, it works really well. So our agenda today, each topic will be about 20 minutes, and we're going to hold questions until the end so that we can use the time a little bit more efficiently. And so if you have did everybody get a handout? Yeah. And there's pencils back there on the podium as well if you need one. So just write your questions down as we go, and then we can discuss those at the end. The handout is designed so that each page, there's one page per presentation. So the first page is just our introduction, and that includes our contact information as well. And then the next will be
viability studies, and so on. So each page has its own. You can take notes on those if you would like. And after the presentations and question and answer time is done, we can go to the fellowship area back here, and there's tables set up, one table with each topic. So if there's one particular topic that was of interest to you, or you can go to all of them, and there's some information there you can peruse, and we will be at each of the tables representing the topics that we've been talking about. So if there are more detailed questions that you would like to ask at that time, you can do that. If you brought your lunch and it needs heating up, there's a kitchen downstairs, so you can do that. And we brought, there's donuts and coffee out there. Feel free to get those anytime. And we also have cheese and crackers for afterwards if you didn't bring a lunch but are getting low blood sugars. So sometimes donuts aren't the best thing to do with that. But. All right, so our first topic is viability studies by Karen Munson.
So I'm here today primarily as a presenter. There we go. But as district superintendent, I also want to thank the members of the team for, first of all, forming as a team and providing fantastic support and conversation to me in the past year, and also for the support that they're now offering to churches in our district. I think it's going to be things are just better when it's voice-to-voice, face-to-face, not just reading a white paper or something off the internet. So the district will now have people who are acquainted with all of these forms of congregational development and can have conversation with you over the phone and in your neighborhood. So I find that really an exciting way that God is working in our district. So thank you all for doing that. So my topic today is viability studies, and these used to be called future possibilities study. But as discovering the possibility studies have become more widespread, that language became confusing. So if some of what I talk about as a viability study sounds familiar, it's because you may have encountered it in the future possibilities study. The work from a viability study comes out of the Book of Discipline, paragraph 213. And they're sometimes called 213 studies. If a church is going to disband or to close or to discontinue, it is required that there be a 213 study. Now, when we do a viability study with a church, we are not assuming that they are going to close. So sometimes it can feel a little threatening when a church decides it's time for a viability study, or when they hear one of us talk about a viability study. It is not an automatic last step to closing. But it does mean that there are serious obstacles to ministry that the people in that church or the district superintendent are observing. So it's time to step back and really assess it with new eyes. And that disciplinary paragraph 213 provides a good framework for doing that. So a 213 study or a viability study follows the questions in paragraph 213, which I'm not going to read to you this morning. You can pull out your discipline and take a look at that if you're interested. But it does not assume that the church is going to close. And that's one of the first things that I say when I go into work with one of these churches, and I try to say it at least 5 times in the first conversation. Sometimes it does lead to a merger, to a closure, or to moving to a new site. It is a transformative process. A viability study should not mean that your church remains as it is. Right? A viability study means that your church should not remain as it is, because there are blocks to ministry that are leading you to ask for that study. So, who is involved viability study. First of all, it's the church leaders, it's the pastor, it's the district superintendent, and it's support from district teams. I'm intentionally not being specific about who those district teams are because the approach we're taking in MidMaine is to customize the viability studies. So we're not just taking a template and saying every church do the same thing. Depending on what the issues in the church are, we're customizing the process that you use and the support that's available to you. So it's probably going to have the district finance committee. It'll certainly have representation from the district congregational development team, but there may be other groups like church location and building or even some conference level groups that we put on that support team. We've also, in a couple of cases, used our conference consultants, and we have an excellent consultant right here in the district, Susan McKinsey, who worships up at Pleasant Street, and so that's a tremendous asset that God has provided for us. So that's the basic components of a viability study team. So the first steps are that the pastor will contact me and say, yes, we're ready to really engage this process. And I will talk with the pastor and I'll talk with some church leaders. Some of the churches doing these studies are as small as 5 people. So in that case, I'm talking to the whole church. Other cases, it may be 20 or 30 people, and so it's strategic leaders to say, what's going on, what do you want to look at, what can we provide? Then I put together the support team, and I meet with the church leaders to launch the study. When we do a viability study, I do at least 2 meetings with the church, and the church does at least 3 meetings, and sometimes 5, so 3 to 5. And a viability study, if it's done well, will last anywhere from 6 months to a year. Okay. So Kelly, can I use Damascata as an example? Damascata, wonderful little, well, it's small because they're worshiping about 12 people to up to 15, and has had an amazing preaching team in place for a number of years. As the church leaders age, they're simply not able to keep up with the demanding building. So our first meeting last April assessed a number of options. One was close, one was merge, one was move, just all the logical options that people could think of as a future for their church. Damascata has a very vital outreach ministry that they developed out of earlier congregational development work. They have a pet pantry that served like a food pantry for area pets. That's a tremendous, vital gift to their community. They also have a group of worshipers who really feel like an active, vital Christian community. They have Bible study, they have good worship, so their issue is really focused on the building. So in April, we launched a study with teams to look at particular specific questions, and then came back together this fall to say which direction now are you headed in. Okay, so they had work in between. We have 5 viability studies happening in the MidMaine district right now. All of them are tailored to the needs of that specific congregation. So, let's see, next one. I think those are all in there. Thank you. I didn't have all of those slides in the copy I'm looking at, so that's really useful to see the rest of them up there. So here are the 4 areas that any viability study or 213 study is going to look at. Go ahead to the next one. You're right, Nikki. That's where I want to be. First, we look at the mission field and capacity. And you'll probably hear a number of the presenters today talk about the Mission Insight demographic tool. So we prepare a demographic study that helps the church look at who are their neighbors and what type of spirituality they have. We look at the current worship and spiritual formation, what form of Bible studies, prayer groups, covenant groups are in the church. We look at finances and facilities, and we look at leadership capacity. And I'll tell you that that last one is turning out to be the key in almost every one of the studies that I've been part of, leadership capacity is the determining factor on whether a church should transform or close. If there's leadership capacity, that church can become any number of things. But if the leadership capacity is not there, then that church is probably at the end of its life cycle, and it's time to do that with grace. So these are the general meeting formats. We do a report meeting that is receiving information. We do a brainstorming meeting that's, okay, what options do you all see in the church? We do a decision-making meeting with me, with the district superintendent, and then we plan for a God-filled future. Because no matter what happens in that church, God is part of those people's future, and they are part of God's future. Now, depending on the process, those may get combined, right? If you have a church of 5 people, you may not do all 4. So again, we customize it. But that's the content of the meetings along that process. Okay, maybe do we have another one, or is that? Yeah. So that's the basic outline of a liability study. And with groups from the district and conference coming alongside churches, it's really become a healthy and God-filled process. I'm so grateful for that.
Hi there. I'm Jen Reed, and I'm here today to talk about legacy ministry. I'm going to move the stand just a little bit so I can have a little bit of seeing. How many of you here have heard about legacy ministry? Some of you have. To me, I'll be honest, this was a new phrase for me. I had never really heard about. Oh, okay. Yes, so I had never really heard about legacy ministry until I was asked to serve on this team and putting together this presentation today. So just to kind of give you just a very, I guess, simple definition, legacy congregations are those congregations that have an increasingly limited opportunity or capacity to carry out their mission and ministry in a viable way. I remember when I first became a member of the United Methodist Church and I began going to conference, I remember having those big reports up on the slides with the graphs saying, these number of churches are closing, and I just remember them saying within so many years, 20 or 30% of our churches might be closed, and the time has come where those years have passed. And so a recent study indicates that currently we're in a period that as many as 30 to 35% of our churches, our local churches, could be closed by the year 2030. And when that averages out, that's about 300 churches closing a year, which is pretty amazing. So legacy defined. When you think of the word legacy, what comes to mind when you think of the word legacy? Right? What do you think when you hear the It's a gift. It's a gift, a request, right? It's a gift or a request. Absolutely. Something that's, like you would say, left in the will. A legacy congregation, then, is one that passes its purpose and its resources on to another congregation or missional entity that has been delegated to carry forward the mission no longer sustained by the legacy congregation. I'm thinking of something like a clothes closet or a pet pantry or some sort of ministry such as that. Legacy ministry with congregations is an effort to help struggling and declining congregations take a hard look at their future prospects and to consider their options. It's an opportunity to be reactive instead of, it's meant to shift from being reactive to being proactive, right? And that they can pass on some sort of legacy or ministry that perhaps the church cannot carry out itself. Okay? Some potential legacy churches have these kinds of characteristics. Lost momentum in ministry, there's no energy or plans to turn that around. Sometimes the staffing in central ministries is no longer adequate or effective. Finding people to carry out the basic functions of the church, serving on different committees, may be a very difficult situation. Annual income is no longer adequate to do effective local ministry. In many churches, there's been a survey and study taken that many churches are just one major repair away from financial disaster. Your 30-year-old furnace dies. The plumbing or pipes freeze in the winter, and you have major flooding in the building, something like that. Many churches now are at the point where they cannot recover from a situation such as that. The church may not have grown consistently over the past 5 years. We put together those statistical reports every year, right? How many people have been baptized or made a profession of faith in the last 5 years? How many new families do you have in the church, and how many families have been there? The folks in your church, are they new, or have they been there for 30 years? What's the tenure of your membership? And does that reflect the surrounding population of the town in which your church is located? And survival becomes the mission of the church. So, but yet there's yes, thank you. Legacy churches have assets left to give, gifts to pass on to help keep their story going in a new way. Right? You may have a building that's located in a prime spot in the middle of town. You may have been blessed with a great endowment. Some of your finance committees from way back made wise, decisions in how they invested their funds. Maybe ways in your legacy ministry to have that service or that ministry continue on, even if the church closes. So just to be clear, legacy ministry, you're going to hear these other presentations today, and I feel like I've got the hard one to give in that, the other presentations is about revitalization and renewal, or looking at the possibilities of revitalizing and renewal. But that's not what really legacy ministry is about. Legacy planning is very difficult, isn't it? It's painful to think about the possibility that your church may close. It's difficult for the church leaders, the faith community members, but also people in the community. Our churches, they're still there as a symbol, as part of the town, and especially if you are in the middle of town. And so it can be a very difficult situation. And there's a constant temptation that as you begin exploring the possibility of becoming a legacy church, let's try to revitalize one more time. Let's try to just give it that college try, right? Just one more time, right? Even when closure is really inevitable. So in most cases, to pursue avenues of renewal and transformation at one more time commonly extends just the pain of closure. People get very stressed out. Some Sundays I've been preaching and maybe it's a rainy day or something, and there's only 4 or 5 people or whatever, come, and then you do get stressed out, you get anxious, right? And so that in that trying one more time, it commonly extends the pain of closure and further reduces the available resources for ministry. However, God is at work, right? And so if you are beginning these legacy conversations, you have a team of people in there that meet with you, and if there seems to be a legitimate reason to consider continuing in renewal, then the conversations about legacy ministry can cease. I mean, if there is a viable opportunity that comes up or hadn't been thought about, and the conversations of the legacy ministry has spurred some new spark, then those conversations can cease. It's not like once you begin the process that you can't pull back and then go explore the other venues that are offered by our congregation. So one thing that legacy work is supposed to be doing is to enable congregations to move quickly and directly. What I mean by that is that sometimes, you begin the process and it can just kind of go on in 2 to 3 years, and people get exhausted. And so legacy work is meant to help congregations come to the conclusion that they need to come to quickly. It's kind of about coming alongside struggling and declining churches before it gets down to the bitter end, before it does get to be exhausting and people are stressed out. And it offers them a better end, the idea of finishing well and finishing strong, giving churches the empowerment, right? The empowerment on passing on a ministry with more care, with more dignity, celebrating, having the time to plan, celebrate the journey and those that have gone before us, right? The great cloud of witnesses, those that have poured their heart and soul into the church in the past, and that it fulfilled God's purposes in the past, and that in legacy work we can help plan to celebrate that and lay to rest a ministry that has served its purpose, while also looking to the future and offering hope by extending a gift or some sort of gift to help bring about a new form of ministry. So legacy work assists churches in deciding to close or repurpose, determine how and to whom they're going to pass on their ministry. A food pantry, a camp, transitional housing, maybe for new mothers, a children's ministry, clothing closet, a Christian education program. There may be some strong Christian education program that your church is supporting that could go on after the church closed. One of my handouts, and it's out on the table, and make sure you can pick it up. You can pick that up on your way by later today. It's a story about one United Methodist Church, I think down in the Carolinas, whose legacy ministry provided school supplies for many years for the neighborhood elementary school. It also made a significant contribution to the children's home in their community. They transferred their parsonage to a local university that could be used for dormitories for students to stay in. The church building was repurposed because it was right in the center of town, and it became a new community center that the town did not have. So legacy work empowers churches to direct resources and assets to mission. And part of that would be to help set up a legal endowment, to set up a legal entity to provide for the ongoing care of some sort of established ministry, community service, drawing up a list of items to donate, all those decisions that have to be made, closing bank accounts, transferring control of the building to some sort of real estate company that would help to manage the building once it closed, the church once it closed. And it also, legacy work provides remaining members and participants with spiritual resources and alternatives. Usually the path to a church closing happens over a period of years. And like I mentioned before, during this time, members experience this prolonged loss. There's anxiety and worry, and time that could be spent in building up your relationship with God and deepening your spiritual life is spent really worrying about how you're going to carry out some of the ministries that churches may not be able to continue to carry out because of lack of folks to fulfill committees and to carry on ministry. So the hope of legacy ministry helps to alleviate some of these implications. We are stewards. The church belongs to God, not to us ultimately. And I think sometimes it's very easy for us to forget that. I know I'm always saying, my church, or our church, right? We think of the church as our church, our responsibility, and we're often mistaken in thinking that if our church came to having to close, that we somehow failed. That we somehow let our faith community down, though our ancestors down, God down, right? That we're letting folks down, but we forget that The church belongs to God, and the church exists for God's purposes. We are stewards, caretakers, and overseers. As Apostle Paul writes in 1 Corinthians, we are stewards of the mysteries. By faith, we believe that we are not alone in trusting in only our own ingenuity and abilities. God is among us, acting to bring about God's kingdom here on earth. And we are meant to be making disciples. We are disciples who make disciples, right, as they say in Matthew 28. And there are multiple reasons that sometimes congregations reach a legacy moment. Sometimes job and employment opportunities vanish in a town, and so young families move to find new employment. There may be an inability to bridge generational changes, or increased age and decreased capacity of current leadership. Decreased resources. A church building that needs a lot of restoration and a lot of upkeep. The capital C church will not disappear, but individual churches sometimes do. People move, people relocate, congregations age. But legacy programs are meant to start a conversation for congregations looking at this option. Congregation members have the option to offer resources to begin new faith communities, perhaps merge with another church, disperse to area churches. The important thing is to spend time in discernment with your faith community and with members from the congregational team that would work with you to ask and to pray with you, what does God want us to do? How does God want us to use the blessings and the gifts that He has left for us to care for? And so, no church lasts forever. No church lasts forever. And being a church member is not limited to a membership in any particular church. God's church is a living organism, and each congregation, and the book that I have here available for sale out on the table, it really does a great job of explaining this about each congregation has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I've never thought of this until I was preparing for today, but the churches Paul wrote to in the New Testament, they do not exist. I had never thought about that. At some point, First Church Corinth closed. So the question is where is your congregation in its life cycle? And if your congregation happens to be near the end of its life cycle, as it is right now, would you want your church just to close? Just to close? Or would you want it to finish with dignity, leading a life, enriching, and a legacy? Something that could be passed on and to continue to thrive in the community. It would be the church in some ways, but just in a new way. In a new way. So there are basically four stages of legacy conversations and work. Honest reality of the congregation's future, learning and discerning conversation, the decision to close or repurpose, and planning and implementing the vision. So in stage one, taking a hard look at honest reality of the congregation's future, and there's several different screening models that have been developed by our denomination that are also too in this book and in some of the handouts. I've got like 3 handouts out there, and some of them explain that pretty well. That have been designed and implemented to assess the likelihood of unsustainability. Also, they take a look at reviewing prior efforts of renewal and transformation. How did those go? Was there any inspirational moment, or did it just seem to emphasize that perhaps closure is the right thing to do? And also reviewing the purpose of the church and the denominational mission against what the church can actually do. What is the vision of the church? And is the church still able to live into that vision and make it a viable ministry? The second stage, learning and discerning conversations. We might do a Bible study, focusing on biblical principles, on missional stewardship. You would take time to look at the life cycle of a congregation, which includes death as a natural step. Looking at the normative life cycle of a congregation and determining where you are in that life cycle. And then also looking outside the church. What are the needs of the community? And does the church have something that they could request that would help meet that need in the community? So it's really taking an honest and hard look at where your church is, your gifts, and your assets that you have available, and if those can somehow be used in your community or in other ways, which we'll talk about in just a moment. And then you can work with the district and the conference about different missional strategies for the future. Stage 3 is the decision to close or to repurpose. And in that, we would start to really make a clear decision about whether you're going to take advantage of the legacy ministry, have a timeline about how that will be carried out, identification of the key leadership group or task force that will plan and implement the repurposing of the church, and then finally, planning and implementing the vision. How to care for the spiritual and relational lives of the current members as you go through this process. This is going to be a difficult avenue, even though you know it's the right thing. There's still going to be a time of mourning and loss as people, and a sense of where are we going to go? Are we going to become part of the church down the street? Are we going to are we going to try to start something new? Is there something new that we can do other than use and opportunities in the conference? Also, to dispose of real estate, like I already spoke about, and other assets that you have, and then to address the disciplinary requirements of closing. So oftentimes there's 3 basic conversations that take place. It can happen, these 3 conversations, these initial meetings could take place within 90 to 100 days. Would involve, obviously, the district superintendent, the director of Congregational Church Development, Rick McKinley. You would gather, depending on the size of your congregation, either just the church leaders, the council, or one board, or perhaps if you're a small enough church, all the folks of the church, and you would have these discussions. And take a hard look, like I said, at the reality of what is ahead of you as a church. And when you look at some of those things I've already mentioned, worship attendance, that number of baptisms, profession of faith, the finances, the state of your church financially, condition of the building, would be some of those things that you look at in these conversations. And then you would gather again, and you would, and here are some of those 5 principles: building and size and condition, the location, the willingness of the pastor and the congregation. The pastor may, maybe you're the lay leader and you're hearing about this, and the pastor doesn't want to, to consider legacy ministry. And then also looking at the nearest viable and growing congregation. Is there another congregation in town or nearby that your folks could get involved with, become members? Do they have a ministry or a mission that can be supported? And then the area of practice. And that's a thumbnail sketch of legacy ministry. Thank you for listening, and please do stop by the table and have a few of these books, and also a few handouts. And one great success story of a church, this church that went through this process. Oh, I did a little bit about the church in Winston-Salem, that, yes, in the presentation.
So I want to say that we have kind of a mini model of this in MidMaine, in that that when during Memorial closed, they left assets for a new ministry that's being birthed by the Bolsters Mills United Methodist Church in Norway. So Bolsters Mills is reaching out to the next community over, which has been very hard hit by addiction. So we have an example of a legacy church. The other thing I really want to emphasize is if your church knows in their heart, and it's soul work, right, that they really are at the point in their life cycle of being a legacy church, and they ignore it. Instead of becoming a legacy church, they become a liability church. Because when they abandon the building that they can't handle anymore, the other church leaders in the district then have to figure out what to do with it. So I love that image of doing the will like you would do for the next generation of your own family, and thinking about what really are assets and how you're part of God's work in the world. So the difference between legacy and liability to me is really striking.
One other comment on that too, a helpful analogy I think I've heard you say, Karen, is when you think of the life cycle of a church, like a human life, that you think of hospice care at the end of life, so that somebody can die well, and to make sure they have all of their assets and all of their arrangements made, but that they can die well. We're not just putting somebody hooked up to tubes in a hospital to extend their life by 3 months, but we are helping somebody die well by hospice care. I think that's an interesting analogy for what Ken was sharing. So if we continue with that analogy, actually, discovering the possibilities is in the life cycle of a church. It's not young, it's not ready to die. It's a midlife church. That is, I'm starting to get some shoulder pain, and, I just hit the big 5-0. So, I'm having to come up with new ways of doing things. And so that is, I hadn't thought of it, that's really interesting. So discovering the possibilities is kind of for the midlife church to give you a good chiropractor or whatever it is that you need to help you to be more fruitful and healthy. So it helps a church see possibilities. That's essentially. So the full definition is a process designed to give congregations a realistic sense of what fulfilling their ministry potential might mean. And so it's an assessment followed by then this evidence then leads to some discussion about what the resources are needed for this church and what would help them to give that kind of kickstart. You can go to the next slide. So Phil Maynard is the creator, if you will, of the program. I haven't actually met him, but I know he's done some workshops. Well, he did one in Tri-State, but I'm not sure whether he's ever done one in MidMaine. And he's a coach, Path 1 director. I don't think he currently is, right, but he had been. And he's coached in a whole lot of different contexts, and I think his kind of home conference is in Florida. And you can read more on the website. Go to the next slide. This is emc3coaching.com, and these are some of the other programs you might have heard that he has also been in the creation or assisting stage. So let's go to the next slide. I'm not sure how well you could read this, but I'm just going to kind of talk about each one of these stages, about what's actually involved in the full process if you wanted to do discovering the possibilities. And so when I came to math a few years ago, 3 years ago, we talking about this as a possibility to do. And it was quite a long process, a very helpful process, but you do need to know what you're getting into. So it takes a lot of hours of preparation for both the pastor and the lay people. And it begins with a lot of data gathering. So the initial meeting is generally with Rick McKinley or somebody from either Congregational Development in the conference level, or hopefully at the district level we can begin doing that to take some of the load off of Rick and having to do all of the discovering the possibilities. And so the facilitator will give leaders kind of a list of information to be gathered, and I have that information on the table. It's a lot. Financial reports, bulletins, newsletters, all of your statistical data over the past 10 years. What else? Your church profile. One of the most difficult parts of it is putting together a list of all of the addresses for all of your parishioners and uploading those to Mission Insight. I'm a pretty techie person. I'm not like John, but I'm a pretty techie person, and it was challenging. But it was very helpful once you have that information in there as well. They want to see a calendar of church activities, information about current ministries, key issues facing the congregation, those kind of things. And so the community interviews are the next step, where they look for about 15 or 20 different people within your community, and there's a list of examples, but the fire chief and the police chief and the school superintendent and just different community members, and there's interview questions, and so you delegate each layperson to do a few interviews, and then after those interviews, someone then needs to compile all of that information and come up with 2 to 5 common issues from the community, that something that's over and over, that our community is really struggling with homelessness or opioids or whatever it is, and kind of put that out there in a summary form. And then the information is gathered and presented back to the facilitator, whoever that would be. In this case, it was Rick McKinley, before hosting a workshop. So, and this is designed to be a full-day workshop. One other thing that I forgot to mention in that first step of data gathering, this is really cool, is Rick arranged for mystery worshipers to come and visit our church. And I have our form, if you want to see the form that they used to fill out of their comments on our worship. And so if you're interested in being a mystery worshiper, please contact me for our district, or Rick if you're open to going anywhere in the conference. It seems like that would be really fun. Yeah, and so it was just really neat to have a report from somebody who wasn't familiar with our fresh eyes. So then the workshop stage is go back. We're just still on that second. We're on the green now. Basically, the workshop is designed for being an all day, and unfortunately, we had to cram that into a half day. So I think it was a little less helpful. So if you end up doing the full process, I would really recommend doing a full day. And so there's two parts of this workshop. One is current realities, and the other is ministry opportunities. So in the current realities, you're looking at the interview, basically kind of looking at from the congregation's perspective, and all of this data that they've been collecting as best practices in each of the 5 disciple-making practices. Discipleship, worship, hospitality, etc. And then they're involved in creating a visual history of the congregation called like a journey wall. So some of those journeys at Bath, for instance, was when two congregations combined, they merged to form the Bath United Methodist Church. And then another big one was when the Bath United Methodist Church decided to move from a downtown area like this and build a new facility. There was a fire. You know, some of those big things. On the positive end, of this Tres Dias was like a big kickstart to our congregation. So when we had to put up our kind of timeline, those events came out and you could kind of see the peaks and valleys of attendance and fruitfulness of the congregation. And then, you know, we review some of the data that we've collected of vital ministries and the condition of our facilities and those kind of things. So then the second half of the workshop is for ministry opportunities. And so this is where the community interviews are shared. Kind of a little bit more detail than a summary, but you know, this is kind of the general context of what we're hearing in our community. This is what, you know, the police department is really concerned about. This is what the school system is really concerned about. And kind of summarizing that for the congregation. And hopefully this is attended by almost all of the congregation. So it's difficult to do that, but think about it in your context of how to get, you know, at least 80% of the congregation there. And so we examined together the demographic information that was from Mission Insight, and Rick will print off, or probably John in our context, printing off a Mission Insight report for, if you've had your church conference, Karen will actually bring one, but there's a lot of different kinds of reports that you can get from Mission Insight, and so you review some of those things. There were some really surprising things that we hadn't realized in Bath. For instance, the huge number of single families who are in their 40s and 50s. And we barely have, I'm like the only, like there are very few people in that age group in our congregation. That is really interesting. And churches are always, you know, wanting to get more kids, but that wasn't the largest population right around our church. So really interesting. So yes, it's a lot of work to get all of that information, but it's worth it. And then you begin to identify mission opportunities and what the assets are of the church. You go around the congregation of people who are there and just figuring out, you know, what are your gifts, what are your talents? You know, we have, I think like 10 artists in our church, like professional artists. And I think we all do that, but then when we step back and say, wow, you know, maybe there's a ministry opportunity here. And we've been thinking of something like you know, the Muse Paint Bar, you know, probably without the wine, right? But, you know, maybe a parent and child paint night where one of our artists leads a workshop in how to paint, and they get to bring home a piece of artwork. Or, you know, there's really interesting things that comes out of that journey of, what is it called, journey, what did it say? I can't remember what it was called. A map, journey map or something like that. So, and then, so after that is done, you receive, I was impressed how fast Rick was able to turn this around. It was about a week that we received our final possibilities report. This is a full color, really nice report that kind of summarizes all of what has come out from the data gathering, from the workshop, from the mystery worshiper, from the facilities assessment. Oh, the facilities assessment, by the way, is not just done by the church, it's done by all groups that use the church. So we put it out to AA and Girl Scouts and all the groups that meet there. But the final report it lists possible options for consideration, ministry potential, those kind of things. And so this report is shared in our context, what happened was the report was completed and passed out during another meeting of the congregation. And actually, that meeting turned out to be more well attended than the initial workshop, so that was interesting. And we all found it really helpful. So we basically just went through the report. One thing that I would personally recommend is there were some questions that came up that didn't make sense in the report, and Rick kind of said, well, this is strange, I've never seen this before. I think if he had gotten together with with me and a few leaders, we could have worked that out before the reports were actually compiled, so that those questions were resolved before coming together. But everybody's busy, it's just hard to do everything in the right process. So. But this meeting takes about 1 or 2 hours, and was, as I said, really helpful. And you can see the report that was generated for Bath. I have a copy on the table, and I think also, who is it? I can't remember what. Yeah. We have one other church. We don't have a printout, but it's on an iPad. So if you want to look at two different reports that were generated, I think that was done before you were there, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So.
It's very helpful to just follow.
Right. It's really helpful for an incoming pastor too.
Right.
So. Okay. So next slide. So Rick is coming up with seeing how many churches are interested in doing this, because we do have like a lot of churches that are in midlife, kind of need a boost and trying to figure out ministry in new context and that kind of thing, aren't ready to close. So he is coming up with an abbreviated process. And since this is still in the planning stages, I can't share a whole lot about it. He has kind of a draft plan that I have also on the table. But this would cut down, the big changes is the data gathering would mostly be done by Rick and the pastor, or Rick and the lay leader. Just a few people, rather than having, I think the community interviews, there might be a few of these, but most of the information is going to be generated online, rather than through face-to-face interviews. And it's taken down to like 1.5 day for the whole thing, as opposed to two major workshops. And you obviously get an abbreviated report. But for a congregation, we're worshiping about, between 50 and 60. And for a church that size, this abbreviated process might work a lot better for kind of a small to mid-sized church. If it's a big-sized church, worshiping over 100, probably you want to do the full process. That's kind of my general sense. So if if you're interested in doing this process, there's a sign-up sheet on the table. And we can help you work out whether you would need to do a full process or an abbreviated process would be sufficient. And so then the follow-up and assessment, this is, without this, you've just wasted your time. And Rick actually said he's done discovering the possibilities with about 50 churches. And he said about 25 of them have just dropped it and done nothing with it. And so that's a whole lot of wasted time, and so I wouldn't recommend that. If you don't think you're going to do anything with it, just don't bother, because it's a lot of work. But it's where the rubber meets the road. I mean, if you take some of these recommendations and some of these dreams and begin implementing them 1, 2 at a time, it's made a big difference in those 25 churches that I have. Now, the process at Bath was a little frustrating because we did this process at the end of the spring, and you know what happens in New England in the summer? Everybody leaves, and including, Rick was gone for a good, so we haven't really been able to get kick-started until the fall, and so we're just starting now. One of the things we're going to begin is actually coaching with Red. So we're going to have a small group of team that look really closely at this Discovering the Possibilities report and begin figuring out how to prioritize together with Rick what the next steps are. So I think that's it. And so please visit the table if you'd like to sign up your name, look at some of the information. And next we have John Baker-Streety, who's going to talk about shared lay ministry teams.
Before I get started, everyone stand up if you can. Stand up, stretch your arms up high, out to the sides, make sure that you're not hitting your neighbor in the face. And then down as you can.
That would be a little harder to hear.
Yeah. And then up again. All right. So, hi everybody. I am sharing some information about the shared lay ministry teams. Right? So you may be asking yourself, what's a shared lay ministry team? Well, it's a team that's formed of lay leaders from the congregation. It's a lay-led ministry. So you have the shared lay ministry team itself that's formed with lay folk from the congregation. There's a coordinating pastor, someone who will make sure you're on the right page, and then a visiting sacramental minister. That's someone who will come in and be able to provide communion, baptisms, weddings and funerals if necessary. Next slide. So you may be asking yourself, what's the purpose of this form of ministry? Well, it's responsible for enacting the mission and the vision of the church as we seek to live out our large United Methodist Church's call to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. This team works under the guidance of a coordinating pastor, like I said, to develop and implement an annual ministry plan. So you may have been hearing a lot about a ministry plan from our district superintendent this year. If you're on a shared lay ministry team, you would be working with a coordinating pastor to implement that with God-inspired goals and realistic strategies for meeting these goals. The shared lay ministry team is a team that works collaboratively on discipleship growth, who intentionally grow in their own faith together as they lead the church. It's covenanted together. This is a really important thing. I think that covenants are very important, and so if you want to implement a shared lay ministry team, you're doing it together. The ministry team is going to be supported by the district to implement and develop and organize their own spiritual gifts, their own skills, their own knowledge of ministry. And so they're doing that both for the benefit of their church and for the community as a whole. Make sense? Awesome. Then we'll move on to the coordinating pastor. The coordinating pastor will meet quarterly with the shared lay ministry team to help develop and coordinate the resources of the ministry of the church. They'll resource the shared lay ministry team in administrative responsibilities. So to have a good coordinating pastor needs to be good at administrative tasks. And then finally, they'll liaise. They'll be the liaison as needed with the New England Annual Conference and the MidMaine District Superintendent. They serve as the pastor in charge. So money-wise, it's a stipended position. If you were curious, it's a stipended position with a memorandum of understanding with the coordinating pastor. And then we have in MidMaine, I love this, Neil Gastonnier is our sacramental minister. Neil is a retired licensed local pastor who is awesome. I like Neil a lot. He'll come and provide regular communion so that we live into our Wesleyan beliefs about having regular communion. What a novel concept. And the visiting sacramental minister will be at the call of the coordinating pastor to perform baptisms and weddings and such. Money, again, it's an honorarium with a memorandum of understanding itself. So those are the three kind of groups of people who are going to be in charge of the shared lay ministry of a church. So you may be asking yourself, why would you consider this model, right? So if you can't afford a pastor, even at quarter time, right, or 1/8 time, if you can't afford that, this might be something you might look into. Closing isn't really considered an option right now. There's something happening in this local church, in this small local church, and so it's not even on the table. Worship is the thing that draws this community together. And they need to be managed in tandem. Maybe they've been managed in tandem with another appointment. Maybe they've been yoked with maybe 1 or 2 or 3 other local churches, but that relationship's changed now. And so this might be something you want to consider. If there's sufficient resources and able to maintain the church's life and witness, that's important. And the numbers under pastoral care are small enough that the congregation itself can cope with the basic aspects of that. So this isn't for 25 people churches where and there's 150 on the roll still, right? This is for the little churches. So how can we help? If you think that your congregation might be a good fit for this, contact us. Contact either me or Gwyneth or anyone on the team. You can come see me up at the table and I'll give you some more information. You have questions maybe that we won't maybe get to in the time together, because I'm sure you have a lot of burning questions about all the other presentations. There's also a great book. It's free, so if you want a free book, it's called The Cavalry Won't Be Coming. Yeah, Cavalry.
Won't be coming in Calvary.
Yeah. And if you sign up on the sheet up at the fair in the back, we'll be able to send that ebook out to you, so you can just have it. And just a reminder, right? We're all in this together. We're in this ministry thing together, so we're looking to support everyone's churches as best as possible. So this is just one more option to add to your ability.
Baker Street, and the pastor here at Calvary. Welcome. I'm going to talk a little bit about the single board model or the one board model structure that I know many people are interested in. We operate with a one board, single board. We call it our leadership board here at Calvary United Methodist Church. And what I'm going to do through my presentation is kind of walk you through why you might consider a one board model, what the purpose might be. I want to dispel some myths about the one board model, for sure, because there are a lot of those floating around. And the first one is that it's a silver bullet that's going to cure everything about your ministry. It's not. So I just want to make that very clear. And then I'm going to talk about the process of moving toward a one board model. If you discern with your congregation that's something that would work for you. And then I want to also share, we're going to spend most of the time there, but I also want to share just some things I've learned. We went to a one board model in January 1st, 2017. So we have almost been 2 years with the one board model, and we've learned a lot, mostly through what didn't go well. So now we're doing pretty good, but yeah, I just want to share that with you too. So you can go to the next slide. So the first question is why a one board model? I think the biggest thing for us is that it frees up your congregation to be more effective and have a more impactful ministry and to be living into its mission in a more effective way. So one of the things with the one board is that you, for the most part, your committee, the typical committee structure in the United Methodist Church where you have multiple committees is consolidated, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. For us, we have a congregation that mostly does not want to drive at night, so we'd rather meet in the day, but we also have folks that are still working 9 to 5 and can't work in the day. So when I got here, this is my 4th year, when I got here, we were having committee meetings every Sunday after worship. And a lot of the folks in our congregation, it was all the same people on all the different committees. And so a lot of time was spent in meetings. People were getting burnt out. People weren't having time to fellowship with one another because instead of having fellowship after worship, they would have to go into a committee meeting. So a lot of what the one board can do is free up the physical meeting time too. So that's one thing. But I'm going to get to a little bit later, that one of the things the one board does is you have your one leadership board, but then there's also ministry teams that kind of function as needed to work on different projects or different missions that are going on in your community, and it doesn't have to be the people that are on the one board on those ministry teams, and they can be very time consolidated. So for example, if you're working on Christmas or Advent project, you can have a ministry team that's just on that. Or we have a stewardship ministry team that meets as needed. That's not part of the one board. Another thing for the one board is the biggest thing about why a one board is the mission. It's so helpful to meet as a one board where everyone is on the same team about what your mission and ministry is. It's allowed us to, instead of just reading reports at every meeting, to do some leadership work as a team together. What does it mean to be a leader in the congregation? What are our ministry and mission goals? And it helps kind of people get on the same page about that. So those are just some of the reasons why. And I can, at my table, I can talk to you a little bit more about some resources that were given to me that explain a little bit more. But I would say the big reasons are efficiency and effectiveness of ministry, freeing up people's time, and getting everyone on the same page about the mission and ministry that you feel called to do. Go to the next. So
is advice from Karen and myself, to keep calm and trust the process. A lot of times, congregations, including our own, just say, okay, we want to do the one board, and then just want to go right to it and become a one board. And I would first, you're not able to do that. There is a process you have to go through, and I would say, although it can feel like daunting and like, why are all these steps, what are all these steps we have to take, and why does it take so long? It is crucial, and one of the things we learned, I'll share at the end, is just the process allows for good communication with the congregation is so key, and that's one of the trip-ups that we've had, and allows for transparency and work with the congregation, and to really discern, is this something that is good for your congregation? Just because you heard it work in another context doesn't mean it's going to work in your context. So as we go through these steps, to remember to breathe and just trust the process that we go through. Okay. So the first requirement is that you have a district superintendent consultation. So you would contact our district superintendent, right now at MidMaine, it's Karen Munson, and you would contact her at the beginning to discuss what it means to have a single board or one board structure. So this can happen, either the pastor or the lay leader would contact the district superintendent to inform them that the congregation is interested in adopting this model. The next is a leadership study. So I want to also say there are a lot of caveats to my presentation, and this is a big one. This talk with you does not count as the single board governance workshop that you have to do. Although you'll probably hear a lot of this information repeated when you do it, this is just a very basic overview, and the stuff that you're going to get in the governance workshop is some of the meat of this conversation. The good news is that the conference has been working to get these governance board workshops online. So you can sign up. They're getting really full. So if you are interested in this, after you have your consultation with the district superintendent, make sure you sign up. But it is something you can do a webinar online, so you don't have to go physically in person to the workshop. So that makes it a little bit easier. So you would go back. So you would sign up for the single board governance workshop. That's usually through your district superintendent or the congregational development director, Rick McKinley, in the conference, and then participate in that in collaboration with them. Okay. The next your requirement is the church council approval. So whether this is your church council or your administrative council, you need to get approval from this governing board of your congregation. So the first thing that you would do is have your church council meet together and discuss the one board model. And that seems like maybe that could be a conversation that happens one time. I would advise that it is not. This is a good time to really meet and think and talk and discuss about what it would mean to be the one board model. There's some educational pieces that happen here because some of your congregation members on the church council might not know even what this is. When we were going through this, Myung, actually, her church had gone through it, and so she gave me so many good books and resources. We're going to get to some structures, but there are different structures you can work with. So this is a lot of information gathering, education, and conversation happening during this time. So you explain the new structure. Yes, go ahead.
These two slides that I just realized.
Yes.
So we have a number of churches who hold open church council meetings.
Right.
And everybody that comes is considered part of the church council.
Right.
The last slide, where you're talking with your church leaders, even if you don't regularly meet as a closed church council, and none of them are closed, but some of us have this kind of congregational all-church meeting approach.
Yes.
You need to meet with your church leaders, with the active leaders, not just with everybody that has a membership or an opinion.
Right, so we'll get to the all-church meeting after this, but like Karen said,
some churches don't differentiate, and
right,
it's really
exactly.
important to meet with the active leaders at that first
right? So just with your active church council leaders. And then at this point, after you do the discussion, which this looks like it's streamlined into one meeting, it might not be, it might be several meetings where you're doing education and having conversations just with your church council, but eventually you come to the point where you vote to adopt, where you vote to adopt a resolution to explore the single board model. And this single board must meet the New England Conference standards. And Karen sent me this wonderful document that I tried to print this morning, and of course our printer was not working. But that document is available, and at the end of the presentation, and if you sign up on the sign-up sheet, you can email me and I can forward that to you. It's a wonderful document I'm reading from now too, and it really outlines this process well and what the New England Conference standards are for the leadership board. Okay, now we're ready. So after you vote as just your church council or administrative council to explore, not to adopt at this stage, just to explore the single board model, then you have what's called a town hall meeting. This is your all-church meeting. Everyone's welcome and encouraged to participate as part of the congregation. So you have the leaders host this meeting of the congregation. You explain the new structure of the single board model to the congregation and why you want to adopt this, why this is good for your context. You explain all your reasons. You then kind of have a listening session where you receive affirmations from the congregation as well as questions and concerns. At this point, you are not taking a vote. It's just to hear feedback from your congregation. And I would say this part is so crucial because if you don't do this part, the congregation can feel really left out. One of the things that we keep bumping up against is the congregation feeling like they don't know who the leadership board is, and we're taking steps to keep reiterating that because it's new and it's different, and even though we've shared this is the leadership board, it can feel like, oh, only 13 people are making decisions on behalf of the whole church, and I feel excluded from that. So it's really important to have the whole church at least be present for listening and exploring this model and feeling like they've been able to share their concerns and they've been received. Okay, so then the next requirement is perfection. And what I mean by this is just perfecting your model. So once you've met with church council, met with the all-town, had the all-church meeting, then your leaders take all that information that they've gathered and meet again to perfect the structure based on their town meeting feedback. And then if there are revisions to what you had originally presented to the whole church, then you call another all-church meeting to say, okay, we've heard you, this is how we're changing anything, if you decide to change anything. And just a reminder again to make sure that any changes you make meet the conference standards for the leadership.
And you'll know that because you'll have consulted with me.
Exactly.
And I'll learn whether they know.
Right. Karen will tell you, yes, these meet the conference standards, or no, they don't. Go back to the drawing board. Here are some things that you need to consider. Yeah, so don't feel like you're doing this all on your own either. You'll be guided through this process. That's why the first step of talking to your DS and expressing that you want to do this is so important. Because if you don't do that, then you could get here having done so much work, and then she's going to say, you never talked to me, or no, these things don't work, and you need to go all the way back to the beginning. So make sure you make that first step.
And we currently have in this district 4 churches that are single board model churches.
Mm-hmm.
They are Reedfield, Green Street, Calvary, and Unity. If you're not one of those 4, then you've gotten ahead in the process, because we have folks that are doing nominations reports for a single board and
yes. So
real problems.
So make sure you keep calm and trust the process. It's there for a reason, and I know that can sound annoying or distressful or frustrating, but as someone who has gone through this process and had kinks, even going through the process, it is so crucial to go through the process. You won't regret doing that. Okay, go back. So perfection. So you make sure the revision meets the conference standards. Great. Sorry. Go ahead. All right. So after you've done all your revisions, you've gone back and forth, and it meets the conference standards. Then here's where all your approval things happen. So the first is you get, again, district superintendent approval that it's meeting the conference standards. Then a church conference will be called at that point. You could timeline this process to go along with your regularly scheduled church conference. That's what we did. So that you don't have to worry about having two separately held church conferences. But if that doesn't work with your timeline, you can always, in consultation with the district superintendent, call a special church session of church conference. So the church conference will be held. At this point, the leadership would present the model again to the congregation. And at this point, no amendments are allowed. So what you're doing is you can have debate and conversation, but at this point, the motion that will be made is to approve this, what has been presented, or not. That's it. So there's no amendments at this point, just yes or no. If it's a no, then you go back and revise, and that's where you can take feedback again. But it's just a yes or no. There's no amendments on the floor. And then, yes, you must vote yes or no to the proposal as it is presented. And again, this would just be members of the church conference voting yes or no. Okay, so that's kind of the process, and you can see how you would loop back if it is a no. If it is a yes, then you'd be in consultation with the district superintendent to then make that happen. Okay, so here's the requirements of what the structure will look like. This is the basic structure, and you'd also be in conversation with your leaders and your district superintendent to see what other there are different models that can go within this structure, but this is the basic structure. So the basic structure is that you have 12 members plus the pastor would be 13 voting members. You would have 3 people. What's the right word, Karen? Designated? No.
You have to have 3 trustees.
You have to have 3 trustees according to the Book of Discipline.
And Maine state law.
And Maine state law. So on your board, you must have 3 trustees, 1 in each class. You also have to have 1 lay leader. You have to have 3 finance members, 3 SPRC members, a lay member of the annual conference, and another lay member.
And the SPRC needs to be able to operate independently of the one board.
Yeah, so the SPRC needs to, like Karen said, needs to operate independently of the one board if necessary, and there are definitely times when it's necessary. Some other models also have the one board, but then a completely separately operating trustees and a completely separate operating SPRC, where some of those members would be on the one board. So those are, I think Reedfield does that. Yeah, so there are different ways, but this is the basic structure.
And our bishop's preference, so hear this, our bishop's preference is that the SPRC be separate, but connected.
Yeah, so the bishop's preference is that SPRC is connected, separate but connected, and I can affirm that that is very helpful. I would also say, just as you're looking at this structure too, what we do is say our leadership board is open, kind of like a church administrative council is open, unless you end up having the whole board function as the SPRC for a particular vote. So just to be aware of that. So the way that votes happen and things like that at a leadership board meeting is the leadership or the one board, I'm just saying leadership board because that's what we call it. The leadership board would, when you go to do the financial reports or vote on a treasurer request, the whole board functions like it's the finance committee. So even though you might be SPRC or a lay member or a trustee, for the leadership board, the whole board functions as finance. Same with trustees. The whole board would function as trustees to take votes on things like that. Okay, you can go to the next slide. The other thing you need still is a nominating committee that is separate from the board. So this is a disciplinary requirement that you have no more than 9 members. The pastor is still the chair, and that the lay leader is on this committee. The really awesome thing that a nominating committee can do for a one board, that I think in my experience, a lot of nominating committees just get together to then nominate. But if you look at your book of discipline, the nominating committee is really supposed to be helping with leadership development of your leaders, giving them resources, things like that. And this is awesome for when you have a one board. It's so helpful and something that we're exploring more and more because the way the meetings end up being structured, a lot of our reports are just sent via email, or we do have folks that are not on email, so we do take a little time at the beginning to say reports just because our board has folks that are not on email and we want to be inclusive of that. But a lot of the one board can be spent on time of the meeting. Some of it can be spent on leadership development, and that's what we're looking more into. And then the nominating committee ends up being a resource for you. And it is their role according to the Book of Discipline. So I just looked that up too. All right, I alluded to this a little bit at the beginning. So you can also have, part of the one board structure is that you have fluid ministry teams. So these are groups that function with the support of the leadership board, but function independently of the leadership board to work on the different missions and ministries in your congregation. So for example, we have a fundraising ministry team, we have a stewardship ministry team, we have a missions ministry team, we have a worship team that functions separately from the leadership board. Now, because of the nature of who is called to be leaders in our congregation, often there are folks who are on the leadership board who are also on the ministry teams. And I think that can be really helpful in terms of communication coming back to the one board. But it's not necessarily a requirement that someone on the one board has the ministry team, is part of the ministry team. That being said, the ministry teams are expected to report back to the one board. Actually, thank you for correcting me. So the ministry teams are actually meant to report back to the pastor, who would then report to the one board. This is going on. This is what the ministry teams. That's one of the biggest shifts. Yeah. So they're not reporting to they're not part of admin council. They're not reporting to admin council. They're functioning separately, and they report to the pastor, who then would relay any necessary information to the one board. Again, in this, I cannot say enough how important communication is. This is something we continue to bump up against. Okay, so lessons learned. Communication is the biggest thing. Like I said, for a while, because this was new and something different, folks felt disconnected from it. So it's so important to have communication. One of the things that we are working on to help with that is in our weekly e-news, and now we're putting it into our bulletins. We have a 5-bullet summary of the leadership board meeting that we meet once a month. So we just have like some highlights from the leadership board so folks can feel like they're included. The other thing that we're doing is starting quarterly all-church meetings just after worship. Not as this is a thing to vote on, but just as kind of a listening space and a listening circle where all the board members, the leadership board members are present, and the congregation can ask questions, share their concerns, share their joys,
We counted our first one as our church conference was number 1, and then we're going to have 3 more through the year to be quarterly. This is a good time, like if you're working on a really big project, the leadership board could present that to the congregation at that meeting, have feedback, things like that. And so those are some lessons that we've learned in the last 2 years of how we can keep transparency a thing, how we can keep communication a thing. We've also learned that it really is a great way to free up time, where you're able to have reports shared over email, or things that would normally take up a lot of time in meeting together can happen outside of the meeting, and a lot of that does. A lot of that happens outside. The other thing that we've learned is how you can build covenant relationship into your one board structure. Our church was pretty good at starting every meeting and closing every meeting with prayer. But what we've learned is how this last year, every year we've now had a whole leadership board retreat that's also kind of spiritual formation as well of the key leaders, so they feel supported and are growing in discipleship along with being the leaders of the church. And doing more of the administrative things, because again, this is very mission-oriented and mission-centered. So everyone on the leadership board also has a prayer partner where they're checking in with each other, which has been so powerful and helped connect folks as they're trying to be empowered to lead the congregation on this team. And yeah, go ahead.
I have one question regarding more single structure. Who's going to be a chair?
Who's the chair? So that's a great question. Thank you.
Meeting.
Yep.
Who's going to lead the meeting?
Yep.
Who's going to conclude the meeting?
Yep. Yeah, so who's the chair of the leadership, of the one board structure? What we do is when we have our first meeting of the year as the leadership board, we elect a chair out of that group. So that's not something that the nominations committee decides. It's something the one board decides within themselves and takes, nominations, or if anyone volunteers or self-nominates, then we elect a chair from within the group. So what we've done is as the pastor, I usually coordinate with the chair and work with the chair on the agenda, that kind of thing. And we also elect a secretary out of that group. Thank you for bringing that up.
But that's Calvary's.
Right, this is our model.
That's part of what you develop
Right,
in
you
that year
decide.
of exploration.
Exactly. So you could decide that the nominations committee votes to who chairs it, or it could be the pastor, lay leader. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so that's what we've done, is we've just elected anyone within the group can do that.
So we do not need a church council anymore.
Right, the one board becomes kind of the church council, and there's no other meetings besides the ministry teams besides that.
It replaces, you cannot
Right.
have both.
Yeah, you cannot have both. It is the church council.
Then there are some people, they say that they are left out.
Yes, that's been our challenge.
So it may not be the right model. for
Right.
most churches.
Right. That's what we're playing with a lot.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
also, sometimes in Unity, we developed like an executive, small little
Yeah.
mini executive.
Yes, we have that too.
Where, before I left, I met with them and we kind of prepared the agenda. And then we would send out, like Annie said, all the reports that you would normally just sit and read. People got those ahead of time and read those. So when they came to the meeting, they were all prepared to discuss. And then we just spent time we had time to vision and plan.
Right. Yeah, so Calvary. Yeah, thank you. That's important. Yeah, Calvary, we have a vision team that actually went through a Growing with Hope process, which is different but somewhat similar to Discovering Possibilities. And that team became the vision team, and everyone on that team is a member of our leadership board, and it allowed us to meet as a smaller group and do more of the big picture strategic planning and visioning that we didn't have time to have 13 people think out in a once-a-month meeting, but then they were still connected back to the leadership board too, so that was very helpful. So I would affirm that having like a smaller executive part of the board is helpful too.
It also helps to do this requires deep trust in the congregation. So if a congregation is having any trust issues,
Right.
it's not the right time to go there.
No.
But the trust also gets built over time as the single board sets benchmarks for ministry and shows the congregation that they're achieving those benchmarks.
Absolutely. Yeah, so we've been, the ministry plan has been our thing in this last year, and we brainstormed and envisioned goals during our leadership retreat that we wanted to be part of our ministry plan, and we check in on those every time we meet to say how are we moving forward, and those are the kinds of things that we try to report back on in our e-news and now in our bulletin every week, because not everyone gets the e-news.
And that takes time.
It does. It takes time. We didn't have, our first year, we did not have that. This is very new that we've realized, like, oh, we have to be a lot better about communication and transparency. We learn from our mistakes, and I offer those. As you're going forward, you're going to have your own things that don't go well, and your own things that do go well, but I just offer you the stuff that we wish we had considered more, or didn't think of, that became part of a lot of our energy that we've had to now go back and redo because we didn't think of it. So I just offer that for you. And I'm happy to talk more about it and what we learned, but just to affirm again that I'm speaking from Calvary's model. There's a basic model that I kind of went over, and then you have to make it work for your context in consultation with the district superintendent. So, yeah.
One more structure defines 3 members.
Yeah.
The most to be treasurer.
Yep.
Define the secretary most to be in. Then it's just one member.
So John, we would actually talk about those details
Right.
beyond this workshop. Because
Right.
some of this model continues to develop. So.
Right. Like for example, like we have a separate treasurer for our trustees. So we have trustees treasurer and our treasurer, and then we have a fundraising stewardship finance person as the third person.
But that's
us.
That's Calvary.
Right, exactly, that's us. It could be the financial secretary, but that will be helpful in the webinar or the in-person workshop that Rick has.
It's not required that the treasurer or the finance secretary be part of
Right.
a single board in the New England.
But without knowing about the finance situation, it's very difficult to
Right, so that's where communication and control. So that's all learning more about how this model works.
Yes.
Maybe when we get to the question period or afterward, we can talk more.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
We want to stretch one more time? Does anyone need a bathroom break?
Yeah.
Maybe 5 more minutes. 5 minutes. Yeah, 7 more minutes. So yeah, there's a bathroom here. There's also one downstairs. If you go all the way through the hall, like if you go out the back of the church, there's a bathroom.
So what do you do if you don't actually have that many people in the church?
Right.
That might not be the model.
Well, the thing is, they actually sort of function that way.
Right, because John.
It's just that some members sort of overlap onto multiple committees.
That's what we have. So like our leader is also, or like we have one person that's both trustees and finance.
Right. Well, I have my ad council chair is also the lay leader. My, we don't have a finance team. Just pretty much, I put people in and say, this is what we've got. So,
Yeah, so then it might be because
but I need to communicate.
Yeah, I was going to say, because like they say, oh, that would have 13 members. We actually only have 11 members. But it works because of how we have it overlap. So it doesn't actually have to be 13 people.
Okay.
It just has to be 13
Yeah.
positions.
And then my other thing is that my SPRC is shared between two churches, so I have 3 in one church and 3 in the other church.
Yeah. I want to share. Remember I told you last time that there was a guy that emailed me about coming to the church. So one of the things he asked, I never got back to the church, but he said like, I told you how he asked those 2 questions, like how you explain God's judgment towards homosexuality, and do you believe that we're like unbelievable this way? And so I wrote back to him, and then he wrote back and said, thank you so much for getting back to this year. I appreciate it. I lost a lot of weight recently, and I'm looking to get it back, of course. I believe in God. With the Baptist Church correcting my growth child when it comes to being gay, I will try to live this one. But it's interesting. Okay. I was like, this is a whole, like, how are you problematize this judgment? So I just said, I, along with many in our congregation, believe that God created all things, including folks who are LGBT, folks just as they are. So yes, the question about judgment is complex. If I'm correct, I'm assuming they're asking about heaven.
All right.
We have to be honest.
You ready?
It's like the word God is like an operates on the group. So I don't believe
Is this on? Am I on?
from a Baptist church.
This one, oh good. So I am going to present fresh expressions. I got to know about this movement firstly when I read about the book Real Church, the bishop's book recommendations a couple years ago. And then I went to Ripple Effect event last year, and then I went to the workshop of phrase expressions and then learned more about this, and I got more interested in that, so I decided to go to the national gathering of phrase expressions entitled Steeple to Street. So it takes place every 2 years. I believe the location changes every time, but it was held in Virginia this March. So I went there, and then there were a bunch of speakers talked about how they started press expressions, what it is all about, so I learned a lot from this conference. And from my talk today, I'm going to, this is a really concise book on press expressions of the church, very thorough, but really short, and just a little book, so I recommend that you read this book, and this book is going to be on the table. My talk is going to be mostly from this book, in terms of the content. So, I have my manuscript, so I'm going to read through my manuscript, and I hope you can watch the slides, that you can follow my talk. So it is hard to deny that many congregations across North America are getting smaller and older. And Terence Hollins, the author of The Fresh Expressions of the Church, writes, many people are just not interested in being attending Sunday morning worship service. Some people are hostile toward the church because they've been disappointed, angered, or ashamed by church people. Many others are simply the local church's preschool, they might come to church's public suppers, they might even ask to rent the sanctuary for their daughter's wedding. However, actually becoming part of the local church's life is of little interest to growing millions of people. In response to this trend, the Fresh Expressions movement started in England in 2006 as a joint movement of the Church of England and the British Methodist Church. Unlike some church planting efforts, a fresh expression of the church was not for replicating the mother church, but for starting a new form of a church in order to reach people the existing church does not reach. So, the Fresh Expressions movement is inherently incarnational. And there are three approaches of the church to community. The first model is attractional. So there is church and there are people, and in between there is a river, and of course there is a bridge. So church always calls people to come to their church in order to meet them, in order to build a relationship with them and build a relationship with Jesus. So church is saying like, we are here, come to our church. So the church draws people and make people walk across the bridge. And the second model is engaged. And in this model, the church walks across the bridge and get to know the people on the other side, then invite them back across the bridge to the church. So in this model, church goes out to meet with the people, but eventually they invite people to come back to church, and that's engaged model. And third is incarnational. In this model, the church walks across to the other side, serve the people in meaningful ways, and prayerfully wonder what church might look like among those particular people. The church is encouraged to think how they can participate in what God is doing in this world by deeply engaging with people's lives. It primarily involves knowing deeper about the community which a church serves and meet people where they are. So the Fresh Expressions of the church take this approach. Church can take place in many forms, in people's homes, in coffee shops, in restaurants, in sports fields, or in church fellowship halls. It involves a process asking who are the people God is calling us to reach. They can be the people who enjoy a particular hobby, or live in a certain place, or share a common interest, or suffer from the same physical struggle, or a recovery community, or a neighborhood which has not church. And that's what primarily Jesus would do. The Fresh Expression believes that's the Jesus movement. Because in the Gospels, we see Jesus went through all the towns and villages and meet people where they are. He did not put a sign on a palm tree and said, all those willing to be disciples meet here at 10 a.m. on Sundays. So his mission field was everywhere he walked by. The Fresh Expressions point out, even when de-churched and unchurched people accept invitations to come to church, they often don't return after the first visit. That could be because much of what happens at church seems so foreign to outsiders and so detached from their daily lives. Therefore, I'm going to present several definitions of fresh expressions. A fresh expression is defined as a new form of church established primarily for the benefit of people who are not yet members of any church. And there are a few more helpful definitions in fresh expressions. Chris Beckford, the Fresh Expressions U.S. National U.S. National Director defines press expressions of the church as taking the church Jesus loves closer to where the people Jesus loves actually are. And the next, another definition is a new form of church that serves those outside the existing church. So the greatest interest of press expressions of church is the people outside the church who might not come to traditional worship service that's happening in church. Press expression pursues four major characteristics. First, it is missional. It follows Jesus' great commission. Go and make disciples. And many existing churches are attempting to attract people to the life within their walls. But a press expression is going toward outside the church and seeing themselves with, of, and among the community. The goal is to join God in God's loving efforts to reach people who are unchurched and far from God. Second, the press expression's characteristic is contextual. It is all about exploring what church should look like in different people's context. So in order to start the press expression of a church, it is crucial, it is required to know the community which church serves. So you can use Mission Insight, always take a look at Mission Insight. And also prayer walking or prayer driving is a good practice that church leaders can do together. As you walk or drive your area, meet with local leaders, both official and unofficial, and learn what's going on in the area. And mark your calendar some major events that takes place in your town, in your area. And it is also important to note that context is not always geographical. The context might center on a hobby, a vocation, an addiction, or an ethnic connection. And these are the part of a list created from the national gathering of press expressions. And at that time, we are invited to write down the people we might want to reach out according to their context, and I just pulled out a few from them. There were a bunch of lists of the people. So I invite you to do making lists who are not engaged with your church currently, and then make a list of the people you want to reach out. And the third characteristic of a press expression is it is formational. And the purpose of the press expression, ultimate purpose of press expression of the church is to make disciples. So it forms disciples eventually. That is the purpose. And fourth, the press expressions of the church are ecclesial. In their mature stages, they are fully church. They are going to be called as church. We expect there will be people who want to associate with others on the same journey, grow as disciples, and worship together. So, when congregations consider the idea of beginning press expression of a church, often two questions raised. First, what is its relationship with the existing congregation? And second, is this going to grow our church? So, in order to answer the first question, existing congregations and press expressions are complementary, not in competition. The press expressions movement is about new forms of the church coming alongside existing congregation, not replacing it. So members of the existing churches often are the ones who launch the new forms of the church, and their ministers often lead press expressions of the church. The answer of the second question is possibly. Some who come to faith through the press expression of the church might end up eventually becoming part of the long-standing congregation Christian. However, the primary purpose of the fresh expression movement is not to fill our pews on Sunday morning. It is simply to practice in the work of God. It is simply to participate in the work of God, to reach out to those who are in need of God's grace and love by taking church to where the people are, the most engaging and meaningful ways. So, Alan Hirsch, he's writer of so many books in relation to fresh expressions in England. He told, it seems that when the church engages at the fringes, it almost always brings life to the center, and I believe that. And I'm going to talk about a little bit about how to start a fresh expression of the church in an established congregation. The first step in starting a fresh expression of the church will be to help our congregation turn their attention to the world, because fresh expression of the church can happen naturally when a church has a culture of creative engagement with people beyond their walls. Church leaders begin laying the groundwork for thinking about fresh expressions of the church by helping the people inside the church understand all of the different types of people the church is not reaching. The second step is to build a team. Just find people who might be interested in starting this work together and who might be willing to take risks. Then the team brainstorms who it is God is calling you to reach. Then consider what discipleship and church might look like in that context. So there are lots of process to reflect, to discern about. And then pray together and discern God's calls and will. And the speakers from the national gathering told us, please wait, pray and wait until the Spirit says it is time to move. So it is all about changing culture inside the congregation. It takes time, it takes a while. So it is so important to pray and as you discern God's will and call toward your church and then wait until Spirit says something to you. So I would like to share the typical steps of fresh expressions development. So once you went out and start a fresh expression of church, these are typical steps they introduce. So listening, loving and serving, building community, exploring discipleship, church taking shape, and do it again. So first to the listening part, we needed to listen to God and to community. Whatever the group we would like to engage, we would like to go there and then listen to their stories by asking meaningful questions. And also we needed to listen to God. And second step is loving and serving. In fresh expressions, beginning with a worship service has not proven to be very effective in engaging those who have no history with the church. The most effective fresh expressions of church begin where followers of Jesus are genuinely interested in serving the neighborhood. The third is building communities. As we listen to people, as we serve and love them, there are naturally relationship building emerges. So that's the part we notice there is a community building happens. And discipleship. So this is crucial part actually. So I've been told from many speakers and I read from books, making disciples takes really long time in fresh expressions of the church. And there is lots of waiting until that happens. But making disciples is the heart of the fresh expression movement. We wait until people feel the conversation around spiritual issues are comfortable. And And it happens when genuine relationships are built among the community and trust built. Sometimes the conversations about spiritual issues arise naturally. Other times, it takes an intentional effort. In the early stages, this discipleship could be really informal. It begins with impromptu discussions. With time, planned discussion groups or relationship-based learning might emerge. This is a stage in the journey that often requires a great deal of patience. Someone who studied the French expression in church said, "Discipleship is a lot slower than I realized. So we should be deliberate, but we should not try to force people to move more quickly than they are willing or able." So next one is church takes shapes. As people move closer, they just want to share their journey together. They frequently get together to share God's love and praise God, so that's where the point church takes shape. So, and after this, just read again, so multiply churches, that's their direction. So I just want to share one example which is really popular in these days. So I want to share the example of what our church is doing now. So we started dinner church several weeks ago in the beginning of September. That was primarily for those who might not likely to come to Sunday morning service. So those who need to be filled their spiritual needs. But there are lots of people I imagine in our town, in our area, who are hesitate to come to our Sunday morning service. So we prayed together to come up with some ideas to fill their needs, spiritual needs. Our church is the only mainline church in Whitfield. I got timer and it's time maybe to write this down. But we thought God's heart would be breaking to those who are yearning for genuine community or their spiritual fulfillment, but not spiritual. There are not many spiritual communities offered to our town and our areas, surrounding towns. So we started dinner church after 1 year of process of preparation, and in the beginning there were mostly our congregation. We started with 15 people. Yesterday we had 31 people.
Wow.
With 8 people from outside the church.
Wow.
It was amazing to see 3 of them from the recovery group who gathers in our church. We keep inviting them to our church, the other events actually, but it was the first time they showed up. So, and then there are other people from town. So we felt the power of getting together and having meal together. But that was fresh experience we try to plant now. And I know the Reverend Jinu Chan in Belfast is starting a formal church in McDonald around the recovery theme. So I just want to conclude with this phrase. God is a great sender, and God is always up to something. God is already present and active in the world, with the church being responsible for discovering what God is doing and then seeking to participate in that. So there are available resources, but I think I can talk about it from the table outside. There are lots of books and resources out there. Thank you.
Anybody have some questions that you've been writing down? We can have whoever was speaking to that topic come and give some feedback.